Angela. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Charlotte. Lovely, lovely introduction. Lovely to see so many Guild members here today, and a complete honour and excitement for me, honestly, to be talking to Rupert and Christine about their two gorgeous books. As the event has been framed, we're going to be talking about quite a broad spectrum of things today. We're going to be thinking about the process of the books, how they're commissioned, the development, the journey that each of the writers went on through their books, and the stories behind some of the recipes, as well as then maybe thinking a little bit about some of the technical things about how the books were put together, because I think some people may find that interesting. So we're going to kind of weave through quite a bit and hopefully get a really good inside track on these two gorgeous books. But I think to kick us off, we should hear from the writers themselves, who are going to give us just a few words about just really telling us about their books. So Rupert, can we start with, like Charlotte, I'm clutching my books. So Rupert, we're going to start with you talking about telling us a little bit about India, the World Vegetarian.
Well, first of all, thank you for such a warm welcome. I'm literally warming my hands off everyone's words. But India, the World Vegetarian, when I thought about it, it's about regional Indian vegetarian food, the kind of cooking that you don't often find in restaurants in the West, although there are a couple of those dishes. But I really wanted to put the spotlight on, you know, the lesser known dishes with perhaps not such high status vegetables such as turnips and different types of squash, and also introducing people to the regional spice combinations across the country, because, you know, it's so vast, and a Goan curry will taste, or a masala will taste radically different from a fragrant pulao in Lucknow. So I wanted to cram in as much as I could, not just with the recipes, but also with distinctive techniques, hopefully to persuade people, whether they're in New Delhi or Middlesbrough or New York, that they too can try their hand at it.
Brilliant, lovely. It's gorgeous, Rupert. Thank you very, very much. Christine, tell us a little bit about yours.
Yeah, can I echo Rupert's comments about the warm welcome? Thank both you and Charlotte. Yes, Italy, World Vegetarian. It's as is Rupert's book in the Absolute Bloomsbury World Vegetarian series. Rupert's was one of the first two that came out. Mine was supposed to be one of the second two, but the fourth one was delayed for COVID reasons. Yeah, the series has a template, so it's small plates, large plates, and in the Italy one, there's a section on condiments, so giardiniera pickles, olio santo, the Calabrian hot chili oil, pesto genovese with basil, pesto trapanese with almonds, tomatoes, etc., so on and so forth. The way I did the small and large plates for the Italy section, because of course, you know, Italians eat antipasti, primi, scondi, was most of the small plates are from the antipasto section of the meal. The large plates are the pastas, risotto, polenta dishes, substantial salads, even a couple of pies, one traditional, one quite modern. And I think I'd echo Rupert's comment about sort of regionality. It was quite important to me to look at different regions of Italy, because I think, as we all know, the food in Italian regions varies. I'm sure everyone here today knows how much value Italians put onto vegetables. You know, they get excited about the arrival of new seasonal veg. Inevitably, you'd think then there are a lot of vegetarian dishes, but in actual fact, many of them are almost vegetarian. So often Parmesan and other, you know, flavor packed cheeses are added to vegetable dishes. So of course, in a vegetarian book, you know, we had to find a substitute for that. And all of the recipes in the book were tested with Italian hard non-vegetarian cheese. I absolutely love that whole communal collaborative aspect of eating in Italy, you know, that sort of sharing of stories and of recipes around a table. And boy, have I missed that this year. But I've spent my sort of working life in food, traveling around Italy and getting recipes from people. And so there were an awful lot of people to thank in this book for recipes from the top to the toe of the country. But that does mean that it gives a really good view of the vegetarian dishes that Italians are enjoying now.
Brilliant, Christine, that's great. And you have both, rather gorgeously, because we didn't really practice this bit, you have both touched on themes which I really wanted to delve into and expand as we go through the session. So it's a lovely kind of way to kick us off. We are going to go probably for about another half hour or so before we get to the questions. But as Charlotte said in the introduction, if you do have a burning question or something which you would like to be asked at any point, do pop it into the chat. I'll keep an eye on it. We'll probably get to questions at the end, but there might be some that we do on the way through as well. So do use the chat function. You can just use it for chat, but if you can use it for questions as well, that'd be a massive help for all of us. So let's go back to the beginning of these books for you both. As Christine, you mentioned these are part of a series. Christine, can you talk to us about how did you, talk to us about how this world, how this book came into your life?
I think you know, Angela.
Well, okay, all right, we're going to skip over. So I should probably do full awareness, full disclosure, in that Bloomsbury Absolute, who are the imprint of Bloomsbury, who did this book, and John Croft, who is publisher of Absolute, asked me if I had any ideas of authors who would be good for these kind of books, and I did a few names out into the ether to John Croft, and a couple of those writers are with us today, which is lovely. So skip over that bit. What happened next?
So I had a long conversation with John about, the series as a whole, which I just think is such a great idea for a series, celebrating, national vegetarian cuisines. And then there was, as I hinted earlier, sort of this issue with how do you fit, the traditional structure of an Italian meal into the format, the template of the books. But, we got round that.
And so, sorry, Chrissy, can I just dive into that? So they came to you with the templates of how the book was going to run. And Roopa, is that the same?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Roopa, was yours first?
Mine was the first. And again, thank you for all your help on that front. Can I also say, just before anything else, how valuable the Guild has been, because the support system I've enjoyed throughout the process is just second to none. So everybody in the Guild, thumbs up to you all. But yes, it was a phone call essentially. And I must admit, I was going through a bit of a sticky phase where, people would say to me, can you write a recipe, but can you make it simple? Can you dumb it down? And I just thought to myself, I'm at the stage of my life now where I don't want to dumb things down. I really want to get into the backbone, to the culinary culture of regional communities. And I think that was virtually in the first minute of my conversation with John. And I just said, look, if you want a knockoff book, then I'm not the person. And he was just wonderful. And he said, no, you've got a free reign, essentially. And yes, there was a template. And
because you were first, Rupert, did you have any input on that template?
Not really. I was quite happy with it, because if you look at Indian cooking, if you take a state like Gujarat, 70% of Gujarat is vegetarian anyways. And even in my own community, Punjabi, there are so many vegetarian, you might find the husband or the father eating meat, but the women don't. So I wasn't stuck for any kind. It's just in India, there's no concept really as a starter, mains and dessert. We have in our meal a thali, which has lots of little dishes. So technically, many of the dishes could be side dishes, qualified side dishes. And it just meant being a little bit creative about which dishes could be scaled up and served on a big platter and which ones were best served as. So in my head, I thought street snacks would be great for little light bites, and then your small plates and your bigger plates, your biryanis and things like that. That was my starting point, actually.
Christine, I think you were just about to say that there was something similar for you in terms of adapting the typical shape of an Italian meal into that format. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about that for you?
Well, I guess I'm sort of used to thinking when I write about Italian food, of thinking in that sort of conventional accepted Italian structure, whereby you have your antipasti, your primo, your starchy carbohydrate course, and then of course typically your secondo is a smaller piece of animal protein typically. So I didn't have a problem with adapting it to a template, and I think it's right that there is a template across a series. So I probably, like Roopa, I sort of didn't have an issue with that conceptually. It was just, how do I go about sort of structuring things? And in the end, the decision was taken to put soups into the small plates section, Whereas of course in Italy they're not antipasti, they are primi. You know, they tend to be quite substantial soups. And the minestrone in my book is huge. I mean, it really is a kind of full meal. It's not a snack type of soup. But once we'd sort of worked out how we were going to do that, sort of everything sort of fell into place quite easily.
How long did you have to write it, Christine?
I had 9 months.
Yeah.
From when to when? So so from go until what point is 9 months?
From March till December to hand everything in. No,
To
actually,
hand it in, okay. And then it always sounds like homework, doesn't it? To hand it
Yes.
in. And sorry.
March to September, and then they extended it to November, so no, it was less than 9 months.
Okay. And then there's obviously the whole process of editing and shooting and all of that after that. Roopa, is that similar?
Yes, similar to me. And I think I literally hold myself up. And the first place I think I went to was your book launch on March the 7th. That was the first
It's all
time.
becoming quite incestuous, isn't it?
I miss people so much because literally I was just testing, writing, cooking for months on end. So it was really good to get out. So
Yeah. So let's talk about what happened through that period and how you put the books together and thinking about the recipes and stories, because it's interesting, I think, that the two books are on one level quite similar. As you said, they're part of a series, they follow this format. I think the way that they're sort of targeted is quite similar, but they're really quite different as well in the way you tell your stories. And I think that is really, really interesting. Roopa, I'm going to come to you first because you happen to still be on my screen and your book came out first. So just if you can sort of talk to us through how you started to kind of put the recipes together. What were the nature of the stories that you wanted to tell?
I think the longest period, or the most emotionally draining period, was finalizing the recipes. And most of that I seemed to be best at doing late at night when the house was quiet. And I found it very satisfactory to open an Excel sheet, and I just literally delved into memories. That's my starting point. Flavors, chance meals on a highway going to Himachal, or my mother's cooking, or then from hotels, working with chefs. And it was just literally key flavors that I wanted to recreate, the kind of dishes. Then I sort of thought about vegetables across the year and put the titles of the vegetables, you know, butternut squash or pumpkins or okra. So I wanted a mix of vegetables that people could get wherever they lived in Britain, or wherever they lived in Britain, but also some that just kind of pushed them a little bit, where, you know, online deliveries are there. So there's a couple of recipes in there for jackfruit. There's one of jackfruit, one with okra. So having a good mix, and it's a bit like writing a menu when you're in a hotel. You want some familiar dishes. You want some with, you don't want everything to be a high energy ride of creative adventurism. Some things are there to just give the anchor. And then you've got other layers on top of that. And then I did allow myself some license with maybe about 4 or 5 recipes, where I thought, especially there's a stuffed mushrooms with gunpowder spicing, and it's just baked with lime and chilies and things, because that's who I am. You know, I grew up in Cumbria. Yes, I lived in India and I worked in India for 2 decades, but I straddled 2 cultures, and I didn't really want to go down the British Asian route, because there are many wonderful chefs who do that so well, with fabulous books. What I did want to do is just put a little bit of my personality into it, not too much, because it is a guide, so it's not a memoir, but although it is a memoir of a culinary sort through the recipes that I've loved to cook and I've eaten through my years.
I think that's a real achievement of you both, actually, that they're very personal. You feel the personality come through the book as a whole and each of the recipes. And when you're doing something which, as you've said, is a guide, it's part of a series and all that, I think managing to do that whilst not feeling like you're sort of taking over the general framework, I think is a very, very tough needle to thread. And you have both done it absolutely beautifully, but quite differently, as I say. And this is something which I think, we'll continue to go into. And Rupert, it seems for me, having had a gorgeous and delicious delve into your book, that there's quite a lot of history in there as well, isn't there?
There is, because India is, there are many, many layers. You know, there's the British influence, there's the French influence in Pondicherry, you've got the Portuguese in Goa, you've got the Mughals, you've got indigenous cooking too, and everything. Then you've got the Chinese influence. And so everything comes together. And I think in India, we're very good at bringing things together and making it our own. So the word authenticity fills me with a bit of dread, to be honest, because yes, it's great to write a traditional cookbook, but take dal, every household will have their own way of spicing it, their own way of cooking it. If you're in South India, you may add coconut milk and curry leaves to it. If you're in Punjab, it's a total onion, ginger, garlic, tomato job. So wherever you are, I think the great thing about Indian cooking is it is very forgiving. And I think sometimes people get a bit put off by the list of ingredients. But if you look at the method, it's actually quite short, and quite a lot of ingredients go into the same wok or the karai or pan that you're using. And I think if I had to say one aim, it is to get people familiar with spices and ingredients they're less likely to put in their shopping bag on their weekly shop. So things like tamarind, things like mango powder, amchur, anardana, ground pomegranate seeds, they all add value to whatever you're cooking. And that's what I'd love to give to people when they do cook the recipes. It's just a little hint of what they can do.
Yeah, I think that's really right. And I think the recipes definitely do that. And I think the writing that you do gives them, gorgeous historical context to it. Whereas, for Christine, I feel you give this amazing warm context to everything through your book, which is much more desperately wanting to sit at those tables with you, because you write so beautifully about these amazing meals you've had right across Italy, and that really comes through. And I'd love you to talk to us a little bit about your process, your journey, if you like, in that 9-month period of putting the book together, and how you did it, and how you brought your experiences of having those meals across Italy into the book.
Quite interesting, because I haven't spoken to Roopa about her process, but actually there are some parallels with the way excuse me, the way I sort of did mine. So I was very concerned. I wanted to cover as many regions as possible, not in a sort of tick box way, but that the food in the north of Italy is so different to the food in the south. So you've got that whole sort of alpine growing region where veg are very similar to things we grow here, and that whole kind of southern Mediterranean aspect of everything. And it was quite interesting when I was sort of writing the book, talking to some of the people at Absolute, who were just amazed at the number of potatoes that we use. Well, potatoes are quite a big thing in Italy. There's some great Italian potato recipes. I mean, gnocchi is the obvious one. But there's an amazing Calabrian potato salad in my book. And I didn't realize until the last time I was down in Calabria how sweet potatoes are a thing down there. I had no idea. You sort of discover things all the time. So I wanted to sort of, cover the country without, as I say, being too fixated on it. And then, of course, there is that seasonal side of, okay, you want to, have as many vegetables as possible that people will use over here. You don't just want to have, puntarelli all over the place. You want to have, the carrots and all the rest of it. And then there was just this awful realization that there were just way too many recipes to choose from. As Roopa said, you just have, hundreds of these things.
A couple of people have asked. So I think I'm right in saying, guys, you each have about 70 recipes in your book. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So sorry, back to you. I just wanted to quickly ask that question. So it was sort of coming up, but Christine, back to you. You had too many recipes.
And as Roopa said, it came down to sort of, just thinking about memories, thinking about, okay, what Swiss chard recipes have I enjoyed? Oh, actually, forget the Swiss chard. I remember something else that I had. And so there was a lot of sort of remembering things and bells going off in my head and looking through notebooks and sometimes looking through photographs. Think, oh gosh, how could I have forgotten that? Yes, that was an amazing dish that I had with so-and-so. And I think to a certain extent, when you start working on a book, you do become sort of just completely submerged in this tsunami of information that you have and you're trying to sort of organize. So yeah, the seasonal variety of recipes and that whole regional aspect was kind of the driving force behind it all. Along with, just quickly, the point Roopa made about, you know, recipes that were sort of from the home and whatever, I wanted to have a mix of traditional recipes that, you know, are just great sort of Italian vegetarian standards, and some more contemporary dishes that perhaps have been quite so recently developed by people, but I think work really well.
Give us some examples, Christine.
Sorry,
Give us some examples from the book.
Sure. So there's an aubergine parmigiana recipe, which it's a Sicilian version, so you don't put it in the oven. So it's perfect for hot days. You cook it on the hob, and it's served, and it's sort of lukewarm, cool.
I'm trying to find a picture because it looks amazing.
Sorry, the parmesan, right? The aubergine parmigiana recipe.
Yeah. Anyway, never mind. I'm quickly going to try and find the picture because it looks absolutely incredible.
Yeah, and there's a things like bread salads. You know, you get sort of panzanella in Tuscany, you get acque sale in Puglia. You know, which one do you? That's the one. Thanks, Jilly. You get so all these sort of variations of the sort of pretty much the same thing, or, you know, same enough. I don't want to say exactly the same thing. I'll get regional people from Italy screaming at me. So there was that aspect. And I also was very, very keen not to just include lots of pasta recipes with chopped veg. So the pasta recipes in the book tend to be pasta recipes that perhaps people haven't come across before or don't know that well. So the pugliese ciccherie trio, where you fry some of the pasta, the assassin spaghetti, where you burn some of the pasta. I put cacio e pepe in, even though it's so well known, because the recipe in the book is just so reliable. It was given to me by a Roman, and he's so precise about the amount of water you use to cook the pasta, so that becomes really starchy for that proper cacio e pepe sauce. So yeah, it was just the whole similar to Roopa, just this whole sort of collection of memories, and then just desperately getting rid of things that I would have so loved to have included, but just didn't make it.
I always think it's interesting to think about the sort of creative conversations that writers have with their publishers, and you've both spoken very with a real clear sight about the route you wanted to take with the book. Was was that an easy conversation to have with the publisher about this is the angle I want to take, whether it's about regionality or a little bit of history, or that mix of traditional and contemporary, or giving some sort of how-to things in terms of spice mixes and things? What was the nature of those conversations? Roopa, maybe start with you.
Yeah, because they had a template, so I kind of knew where they were going with the direction. But what was quite lovely was that they did say that they'd left gaps for me to fill with something that I'd find interesting. Techniques, it could be top 5 ways with, and they were mine to fill. And so I again had to think. So things like, I remember when I was at the Taj, this elderly man, he was ancient, and really I stalked him because he was such a, used to cook for the Nawabs in Lucknow. And one day he just called me across, and he said, just to get me off his back, I think, and he said, I'm going to show you 2 recipes, and after that, just get out of my sight, don't come near me. And one of them was a technique that changed my whole culinary approach to cook, to life, because it makes me sound like my change to life, but he smoked rice for a biryani with 1 piece of charcoal, a ladle full of ghee, and he put a couple of spices in there. So the smoke was actually scented with cardamom and cinnamon, and he slapped the lid on and let this smoke infuse the rice. Well, this just was incredible, because then I came back to Britain for my summer holidays. We're making fish cakes. I'm going, we're going to smoke those fish cakes. It's a totally British thing, but I was using an Indian technique. And again, you make small adaptations, because he used a betel nut leaf, which has got a lovely flavor, which is hard to find here. I use aluminium foil. It's fine. We got by. So I was quite keen to put in some of those techniques, making your own paneer, because if you make your own paneer, it is so far superior to anything you'll buy over here. And the only reason a lot of people, don't make their own in Indian homes in cities is because there's a dairy, in the local market, and that's where we would buy our cream and our homemade paneer. But then you take it a stage further and say, well, you could flavor the paneer. So you could add chilies and cumin and, diced red onions to it. And so you take it in another direction again. So you're using sound foundation, sound techniques, and then you show them or you share them, and then you just take it one step further and say, well, why don't you smoke yogurt instead?
Is that an approach that you recognise as well from your book?
Yes.
No,
Yes.
I'm about Christine's take on that. No, not at all, Rupert. But Christine, that idea of taking a recipe, I think you were touching on this before, taking something which is quite traditional and then sort of layering it up, if you like. And I'm interested as well, actually, about in doing that, was there ever a point, and for the moment in terms of the Italian book, of really sort of wishing that it wasn't just vegetarian? Like, did that ever feel limiting, Christine, or was that a creative opportunity?
No, I don't think it did feel limiting. No, I don't think so. I think I had that mindset of I'm writing a vegetarian book. Yeah. So no, it didn't. It felt that, okay, that's the task. That's what, that's what we need to do.
And you write so well about, and it's really interesting, I haven't really thought about this, that in Italy, you were saying, I think I got this right, that you would see in the market signs on vegetables that weren't telling you what the vegetable was, it was telling you where it was from. And so that sort of plays into how important vegetables are to Italian culture.
Yeah, I first noticed that down in Puglia. If anyone's been to a gorgeous town called Martina Franca, which is where I worked for quite a while, and there's a big sort of piazza just outside the old town where they have this huge market. It's sort of 80% fruit and veg, a bit of meat and cheese, and a few extraordinary items of clothing. We're talking southern Italy here. And I can remember walking around there, and it suddenly hit me that none of the signs, the price signs you have with the aubergines or whatever, had aubergine or fennel or tomato. They just all had the place it came from. So they all had, sort of Ostuni, Fasano, Sant'Agostino. That I'm thinking, that's quite extraordinary. And of course, everybody knows that, a tomato is a tomato. Why do you need to have tomato written on it? And that was a real revelation, because most of these places were literally a half-hour drive away.
Yeah, that's so interesting, isn't it? It tells you an awful lot about those regions, those food cultures. Going to come to one of the questions, which I think is quite an interesting question, and it's from Ruth Watson, picking up on something you were saying, Roopa, that you mentioned that a man might eat meat while a woman would typically have something which is more vegetarian. And Ruth is wondering if that is to do with status, or is that historical sort of hangover, as it were, or is that something financial? It's this sort of question about man equals meat, woman equals veg.
No, I think it's a combination of many things, some of which will be religious persuasion, others it will be cultural. Quite often, it's changing now, but 25 years ago, I would quite often be the only woman in the butcher. The men would go buy the meat and they'd make a big deal about cooking it. And women, not, it was their choice that they chose, or perhaps they were brought up in a household where they were vegetarian. And so at the age of 20, when they married into this household, they chose to stay vegetarian. And the thing is, it's very accepted. You never ask when you entertain, are there any vegetarians? It's an assumption that there will be. So you always put a spread of dishes which include vegetable dishes and also meat ones too. But I would say it's usually religious persuasion mixed with cultural upbringing. And again, each state has its different values. I mean, I was just talking to someone about Diwali. Diwali is one of the few festivals where meat is not banned in many households, and that's quite unusual, because most Indian or Hindu festivals tend to be vegetarian, but not this one. I must say, I love vegetarian food, but while I was testing the recipes, I spent a lot of time in my butcher, and we would have things like sausage and chips and steak and mash, because, 70 recipes, well, a few more. If you're doing that day in and day out, and friends would say, should we go out for lunch? I'd say, yeah, can we go and have Hawksmoor? And it took a little while, because you're so engrossed in what you're cooking. At the end of the day, I didn't want to have, a bit of black pepper, fair enough, but no cardamom, no.
Interesting. I think it does speak to how all-consuming working on a book, as so many wonderful books across the members who are joining us for this event today, and I'm sure everyone will say it just becomes so all-consuming doing it. Christine, I just want to come to you to pick up on the idea of how common or not a vegetarian diet is within Italian culture.
Oh, that's interesting. So I don't think vegetarian in our meaning of the word is common throughout the country. I think there are certain parts of Italy, especially with young people who are sort of more into vegetarianism and even veganism. Excuse me, Turin is a big vegan, not uniquely vegan obviously, but is a big vegan city at the moment. I was interestingly in the Veneto about, my timing's completely confused with all this lockdown year. It must have been about a year and a half ago. And I was on a press trip, and I was sitting opposite the first dinner we had. I was sitting opposite one of the Italian people who was part of the group. And I couldn't quite work out why. He was always served first, and he always had different food to the rest of us. And I was just a bit intrigued. And so when we got up after dinner, we were mingling around, I spoke to him, and he said, it's because I'm vegetarian. I said, okay, have you been vegetarian for long? Thinking, this could be an interesting source of some information. And he said, all my life. He said, my mother was told when I was, a baby, I couldn't eat meat or fish. And he spoke at length to me about how it has got easier over the years. But then a few months later, I was in Umbria, sat down to eat one night, and the restaurant we were eating at prided itself on the fact it had a vegetarian menu. So I asked to take a look at that. And the first 3 items on the menu were fish. And vegetarian cheese is not something that even chefs in Italy who are quite clued up about vegetarian cooking, to them all cheese is vegetarian. They don't get the animal rennet aspect of it at all.
That's so interesting as well. So folks who are joining us this, please do continue to ask questions. We've got a few questions coming in. We're going to start to pick up on some of those. We have a lovely question from Hattie, which I'm just trying to find. Christine, I'm going to ask you to answer this first, because now you're on my screen, so we're going to stick with you. But I will be coming to Roopa for this as well. So this is Hattie asking, do you each have a vegetable that you, or maybe others in general, had a problem with but grew to like or unlock through the research and testing for these books? And any sort of particularly exciting personal discoveries that these books unlocked for each of you?
Gosh, I don't think there are any veg that I don't like, actually. The one veg I've had an issue with for a long time actually was okra, which is not in the Italian book at all. But then I was given a dish in Cyprus, so I love it now. No, interestingly, I'm not a huge fan of sweet potato that we talked about earlier. I don't have a terribly sweet tooth, so sweet potatoes tend to leave me a bit cold. But I do love the Calabrian white and sweet potato salad. But no, I think I just, there was no big revelation about, okay, I don't like broad beans. I love broad beans. No, all the vegetables in the book I absolutely love.
And was that because the vegetables you chose for the book were the ones that you felt a connection and a sort of culinary affinity to?
No, I think it was more a case of were these vegetables that were easily obtainable outside of Italy, but they were a good reflection of Italian dishes.
Yeah. Interesting. Roopa, what about you? Was there anything that you weren't mad on that you now are, that has
I really struggled with turnips because in India they are mild and they're small and they must be a different variety. And I really wanted to recreate one of the dishes that I tried from Kashmir. And I must have tried about 8 times, and each version I made was worse than the other because it was just so powerful. So the flavor of the turnips that I bought here just overrode everything else. And I kept getting more and more upset and also more and more determined to crack this. And I would go, I mean, because I couldn't go off to the farmer's market and buy them. So every morning at 7 o'clock, Morrison's opened in the morning, and I went and I bought turnips. And there was a revelation one day because I was at the till and there's a Punjabi lady who's now my friend. And she just said, "Can I ask you one question?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Do you keep cattle? Because you feed turnips to cattle in India." And I said, "No, I live in Hatch End." And she said, I needed someone to offload on. And I just said, "Look, I'm having this real issue. I want to make this turnip dish and I just can't get it right." And she just spoke to me in Punjabi, and my Punjabi isn't great, but I got the gist of it. And she said, "It's because you're not salting the turnips, right? Because you salt it and you'll get out all that astringent flavor." Well, I never did it in India. And then she just off the top of her head gave me this recipe with mango powder, green chilies, little tiny turnips, which have been salted and cooked in homemade ghee. I went home and I can honestly say it's my favorite recipe in the book. It's really simple, but she managed to bring me around this supermarket till lady in Morrison's, provided the highlight for me, at least in that book, with her turnip recipe. And I think I've credited her too. So yes.
That is such a good story. I love that she asked you in all seriousness if you kept cattle in Crouch End. Absolutely classic. Christine, question for you, which is a really lovely question. It's quite long on the chat. Maybe people can read it on the chat for the full context of it. It's from Ruth Watson and came in at 11:38 if you want to have a look at that. I'm going to distill the question down for you, Christine, for time purposes. And Ruth is asking, I think, about the nature of cooking vegetables, and that it feels that we in the UK are taught, encouraged to do the kind of al dente, don't overcook the vegetables. And yet Ruth is saying that in her experience, often the flavour can really kind of come out with longer cooking. And the question is really about this disconnect and how maybe we can sort of, well, I'll let you take the question where you want it to. It's sort of how to cook the vegetables for maximum flavour and our preconceptions about not overcooking.
Yeah, I think green beans are the classic one. When you sort of go to Italy, people often say, they overcook the beans. I think so much of this is down to personal preference. I think there has been a trend of people having sort of relatively arguably undercooked vegetables. I'm sure many of us will have sort of this time of the year discussions with, perhaps not this year, but in recent years, with sort of older family members who, we suspect put the Christmas veg on to cook in October, that kind of thing, Italians cook vegetables in all sorts of different ways. I think the big difference for me with flavor in Italy, and I'm frequently asked this question about organic veg in Italy, do the Italians only eat organic veg? Well, no, they don't. They're absolutely obsessed with flavor. And of course, fresh vegetables have more flavor than not fresh vegetables, whether they're organic or not organic. And I had a big discussion with somebody about this once. The fact that veg in Italy that aren't organic, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are big sort of industrially produced, pesticide drenched veg. They're just grown locally. They may have a marginal amount of pesticide on them to counter something which is about to ruin the entire crop. But the soil will be fertile. The soil will have been looked after. The crops will have been looked after. So perhaps that bunch of whatever you've got would not have passed the official organic jump through all the hoops, but it will taste amazing. And that is always, in my experience, the most important thing for Italians is how it tastes. So I think that's why lots of sort of local and heritage varieties are so popular, because, you know, they fit in well with the soil and the climate of that particular area. There's also an element, of course, of habit, what people are used to, and the vegetables that fit in with their local dishes. You know, they're the beans we use for this dish, and so on and so forth. And so I think that element of how you cook things is all to do with the flavor that comes through. And, you know, if you're cooking veg that is, dare I say it, has been sitting in a supermarket refrigerator for a few weeks and doesn't taste it very much, you know, you're going to be hard pushed to cook it in just water with a little bit of salt and get it taste substantial. Your point, Roopa, about, you know, turnips taste a lot stronger in some places and in other places, you know, that it is that sort of basics of integral taste of the vegetable that counts for something, not just how you cook it and what you add to it.
Well said, Christine. I note that the blurb for this event mentioned about challenges, and I feel we haven't really talked too much about the challenges along the way that you guys may have faced. So let's do our duty and touch upon that. Christine, what for you, and this can be on any aspect of the book, it could be about the initial idea development or the recipes or putting it together or the process of working with publishers or how you felt after publication or anything that, you know, those moments, you know, for you that may have been more of a challenge in the process than others.
Some of the recipe testing was there were times when it felt quite relentless. But I think that's no different to anybody else who's ever worked on a recipe book. You know, there are times when you just think, oh, I would just love to be able to cook whatever I want today, as opposed to having to be able to get through, you know, the next 6 recipes and make sure they work. I think there have been more actually moments of joy in going through this book than there have moments of anguish. I mean, there's obviously always that, you know, oh, why didn't I include this? Or I can't believe we couldn't put that in because there wasn't enough room. But that's just general, you know, sort of creative recipe writing, recipe gathering, torment, dare I call it that. I think the team at Absolute Bloomsbury were absolutely fantastic. So Emily, I can see Roopa nodding. They were just brilliant. The whole team I had for the photo shoot were the absolute dream team. They were just great. I know everyone here probably knows Genevieve Taylor, Matty Wood, Mike Cooper. They were just the best team. Adam O'Shepherd, Marie O'Shepherd was on maternity leave when I did my book, although I think Marie worked quite closely with you.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. They were just the best group of people to work with. So, and I'm really not sitting on the fence here. I'm not trying to avoid the question. There weren't.
I don't want you to have problems where there weren't problems, Christine. I think, you know, and I can, you know, this is now a Bloomsbury absolute love-in. But, you know, John Croft, who, you know, heads up, he would say they are, you know, a writer's publisher, and, you know, their focus is very much on helping writers deliver the book they want to do, obviously within, you know, certain constraints or whatever, you know, it might be. But they are, you know, gorgeous publishers in that way. Roopa, have you got more challenges? Have you got any anguish? Can I wring any anguish out of you, Roopa?
Well, I think for me, because sharing recipes in India is an oral tradition, it's not like in the West where you have a style guide or a spelling guide. If you look at something like black lentils, urad dal, U-R-A-D, you go to the shops and it's spelled U-R-I-D, right? Chapatis with 1 P or 2 Ps. And I did find myself drawing up my own style guide, and sometimes you'll miss it. Dal with an H, dal without an A. And then a lot of time was spent checking to make sure there was consistency across the board. And again, I think I could have written reams in the introduction, and it is sort of taking emotion out of it. Sometimes I'd write a lovely turn of phrase. I think it was something about pakoras and the monsoon season. And I sort of got carried away, and then you get attached to that sentence, and everything else should revolve. But then you go away and you have a cup of coffee and you don't look at the screen, come back to it, and you think, yeah, delete. It's taking emotion out of it and yet retaining a sensibility and a feeling of mood. So there were times when I had to be quite brutal with the introductions. But yes, I mean, that they were the main things. The team was just fabulous. I mean, we were testing these recipes. It was 38 degrees outside. It was July, and we were positively melting. But it was a great bonding exercise. We all were in it together. We were all pitching in, and it was great because I took some of my own pots and pans, and they feature in the book, and that's what makes a collaboration work. So there's no authoritarian person saying, this is the way we do it. There was always, you know, when there were questions, they were framed as questions, not statements. And that felt really good.
Very positive experience, right? Any more questions? We will carry on, and we've got another 5 minutes or so. So if anyone has a question that they haven't yet asked, or something which they thought we might cover and we haven't yet, please do use the chat and get your last few questions in. And whilst that's happening, I'd love to hear just a little bit from each of you about just a couple of recipes, and maybe favourite recipes, things that mean the most to you for any reason, or things that you especially love to cook, or if someone on this group was to email you and say, I've got the book, I'm really looking forward to it, what should I cook first? What your responses to those things would be. Roopa, let's go for you. You start.
Hello. Hello.
Roopa, are you there yet?
Yes.
Roopa, you come
Yes,
back.
can you hear me? Yeah. I think it'd have to be my mum's chanas, because it's the kind of thing we would take on picnics. So we would be the Indian family, and we'd usually go when we had friends. So there'd be a big posse of us in colourful saris and a big sheet which we'd lay on out in Keswick. And Mum would have a Tupperware container of chanas, which had been stained slightly yellow because of the turmeric. But that was part of the joy. And she'd wake up early and she'd fry puris, and we'd have these chanas in a big box, puris, pickle. And that every time I make it, even though when I went to India, I had other people's chanas, they just didn't measure up to the ones Mum made. And I think that's the dish that I'm most attached to. But then there's things like the chili cheese toast, which I just threw in as an after. But it's one of those things that they serve in Indian clubhouses, which are sort of modeled on the 19th century British system. So you'd have your shot of whiskey and you'd order a chili toast, chili cheese toast one, and it would come in little strips, and it was just fabulous, great cheese, bites of green chili. So yeah, I think those two quite contrasting dishes, simple dishes, are two of my favorites.
Lovely. Christine, what about for you?
Can I just say the chili cheese toast in Rupa's book is I haven't had it with a glass of whiskey yet, but you've just so yeah, we'll do that. I'm one of those people, I'm rubbish with favorites. I don't have a favorite album or a favorite book. I'm a bit fickle in that regard. There are certain recipes that I just cook an awful lot of. So the spicy farro, all the farro recipes I adore. I'm a big farro fan. The spicy farro soup this time of year is an absolute regular in our house. I love the winter salad with the horseradish dressing. Yeah. That was fought over on the photo shoot. It was who was going to get to take that home, with everyone saying, there's no way we're just using that for this salad. We can use it for so many other things. And interestingly, there's a pie in the dish, which is quite a sort of modern thing. It has a pastry top. It's celeriac, blue cheese and potato. And that went down an absolute storm in the photo shoot, which quite surprised me. Yeah, I mean, all the pasta recipes. I think the egg yolk ravioli that's on the cover is an absolute winner. The one made with wonton wrappers. I cooked that. I did a dinner birthday for my father back in January. And I think we did 5 courses. Had Dan, my husband, helping me, but we did 5 courses. Did that egg yolk ravioli for 9 without even batting an eyelid. But it's one of those really dramatic dishes that yeah, kind of always creates a bit of a stir. You get a lot of bang for your buck with it, and it's very, very easy.
How brilliant. Now, you mentioned there the word cover, which is a gorgeous segue into a question that's just come in. So we have Ruth Watson, who is asking, it's a question for both of you, but I'm going to go for you first, Christine, because you mentioned the word cover. But to what extent, if at all, you had any say in the cover design?
I didn't have any say at all.
And even in choosing which one of the dishes it would be? Okay.
No, so when we did the photo shoot, there was this constant, okay, if you see anything that you think would work for a cover, then, you know, signal that. And it had to be something round, because that's the format of their cover choice. And so there were a few ideas, and in the end, it wasn't absolute, it was Bloomsbury. I don't know about you, Roopa, but for me, it was Bloomsbury who chose the cover. And I was quite surprised by the choice, because arguably it's not a traditional Italian dish. It is, yeah, it's ravioli made with wonton wrappers. But they really liked the idea that it was Italian, but with a quirk. And I think it's a great cover. I don't have an issue with it. If I had an issue with it, I don't know what the response would have been. I'm sure they would have listened. But I was absolutely fine with it.
Rupa's nodding along, so I'm
Yeah.
going to...
Yeah, absolutely. My expertise is not in design, and I think they already knew while they were shooting it that this would make a good cover. But what I thought was quite interesting was David would just wander around when we were frying onions, or there was a couple of stray curry leaves, and he would just take that picture, and quite a few of those little stray images actually made it into the book. And it's quite good to break up the recipe heavy images with just some simple ingredients, or even I think there's one at the back where it's just a spoon on the surface, and that's it. It says so much. But words tend to be my thing, and I was very happy with the way they came. And you know, they've got a great team out there, so they kind of know. And I'm sure they'll do all the research on what sells and what's more catchy and that kind of thing. So
you've led us there, Rupa. You and Christine are both doing gorgeous jobs here of leading your questions. We have a question associated to that, really asking about photography. You just mentioned David, and that's David Loftus.
Yes.
Who is extraordinary food photographer, I think. And the question is really to both of you about to what extent you had any say in choosing the photographer. Was there a stylist? Did you cook the food yourself? Rupa, you go first. Christina, will come to you.
Yeah, I was asked what I think, and then Em, I think, mentioned Rukmini Iyer, and I know her from before, and I just thought fantastic. And because we had such a lot to get through, and I realized it's all about timing. And
how many dishes did you photograph? Remember?
We did them all.
You did them all, okay.
We did them all, even the breads, not the pickles and chutneys and add-ons, but we did
and how long was the shoot? How much time did you?
It was just a week, and it was 38 degrees.
Yeah.
And it was absolutely boiling, and we just, all of us pitched in. But in my head, I had a running order, because you just have to, because you need, you know, it's just like when you're cooking for a dinner or something. So we would do quite, I mean, I remember when I was working in telly, in those days, we would do a maximum of 8 shoots, eight images a day for a magazine. And that would take ages, but here we are, you know, times have changed, and he just has an instinct. And so there was very little time spent on arrangements. It was more about us getting the cooking done on time and making sure everything was in order. And also, you know, for some of these ingredients, you know, you can't get them from Waitrose, the curry leaves and a couple of the spices. So on my way back, I would pop in and, you know, get a bag full of something. And yeah, so it was quite, and there's a lot of grinding, you know, there's a lot of masalas that need grinding. And so we were literally melting by the end, but it's all about planning.
Yeah.
And we managed to do it in the end, yeah.
Christine, what about you and the photography styling team for your gorgeous book? You mentioned Genevieve Taylor earlier, who I'm guessing was a stylist, but I'll come to you for this question about, did you have much say in who that team was, and did you do the cooking for the shoot? Talk to us about that.
So I was asked, would it be okay if we use the following people, and I was just looking. I thought that would be absolutely fantastic, because I knew, I knew Jen and various other people. So yeah, I was more than happy with the choice of team, and I went down to Bristol for the week and stayed down there. And yeah, it was 5 really full-on days. So I didn't do the cooking. Jen did the cooking, helped by Adam, and they worked flat out with me, sort of, saying, no, we need to do it this way, or no, that should be done there, or no, it makes more sense to, do these things on the same day because of whatever reason. So it was just, and the best sense of a collaborative team effort. Everybody sort of knew what they were doing. Everyone was used to working in that environment. There were no egos at all. Everybody just pulled in together, and there are always a few hiccups, aren't there? Always a few things that go wrong and all the rest of it. And everyone just worked together, pulled together, and made it a huge amount of fun. There were long days. It was hard work, and we shot in February. So the days aren't that long. You have a finite amount of daylight to shoot in. Yeah, and it just worked really well. But there was absolutely no way I would have been able to do all the cooking. We had 2 people cooking full time.
Yeah,
to get it all done.
Full on, it's not. Charlotte Pike is teasing us by saying she has a question for Roopa about Semolina, but she's not actually said what the question is. So I'm going to tie up and then pass back to Charlotte, and Charlotte can ask her the Semolina question. But before I pass back to Charlotte, just to say, it's complete joy, Roopa and Christine, to talk to you. 2 fabulous writers, 2 gorgeous books that you've produced. Thanks so much for your time today. I really hope that everyone watching, listening has enjoyed it as well, as much as I have. Charlotte, back to you and your Semolina question.
Thank you, Angela, and thank you, Roopa and Christine. Sorry, just a really quick question for you, Roopa. And can I just say thank you very much for your help and generosity in getting familiar with the ingredients I need to cook through your book, because I've had a few issues getting hold of things and discovering lots of new ingredients. So thank you. Really quick question on Semolina. For the Semolina doses, page 124.
Oh,
what would you recommend?
I feel you're abusing your position of chair here by asking such a question.
Love this. Use the fine one.
This one.
Yeah. Is that?
Thank you.
Well, also, because it says double milled on it.
Yes.
When you go into an Indian shop, you will probably find 3 grades of semolina. And if you don't know, I mean, look, it'll be fine either way, but I think you should use the fine one.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That's lovely. Well, I won't take up everyone's time with my culinary queries, but thank you. It's been a total revelation. And I would just like to thank Angela, Roopa, Christine for your time this morning. It's absolutely fantastic chat. Really fascinating to hear more about your wonderful books, and I am looking forward to continuing to cook from them both. So thank you very much indeed, and thank you very much to everyone on behalf of the Guild for joining us for this event. We have our drinks event next at the end of the month, and then coffee morning on the 1st of December. So future events will hit your inbox shortly, and thank you again to everyone for joining us this morning.
Thank you all so very much. Thank you.
I'm just going to stop the recording.